topic. And here some people reciting instead of mimma khati'atihim ughriqu fa udkhilu an-nar, they say mimma khatayahum ughriqu. Is that right? Or which Imam recited that?
Okay, the brother asked the question, instead of القراءة مما خطيئاتهم, they were saying مما
Khatayahum.
مما خطاياهم. That is a different qira'ah, that's correct. That's a correct.
Is that authentic?
That's a qira'ah, permissible qira'ah.
So tell us about the different passages of different asma like Shatibiya, other furuq. So how they are formed? You explained that there are 20 total qira'ats from 10 imams and 20 students, and tell us some of those furuq, how they are formed and how they work.
Brother asked that, he mentioned that there's 20 different, 20 qira'ahs, basically 10 imams and 2 rawis or 2 students. So predominantly the qira'ah that we studied is the qira'at al-Shatibiya, riwayat al-Shatibiya. And there's qira'at al-Durri, there's different riwayas. For example, now we'll use the Hafs example so we can all relate to it. Very simple. What we study today in the masjid, when you go and you learn Nurani Qaida or Yasan al-Quran, whatever it is, and you learn Quran, the rule you learn from mad. For example, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ مَدْ munfasil, Hamza and Alif are in a separate word. We learned that the duration for this is 2.5 to 4 alifs. Tawassut. There's 3 different levels of mad. Qasar, tawassut, tul. Qasar being the shortest, tawassut being mid-length, and tul being very long. Famous in Warsh and Hamza riwayah. Now, as far as the turuq is concerned, according to Imam Shatibi, before I go on, Imam Shatibi rahimahullah, one of the most famous, one of the most famous and learned scholars in the field of qira'ah. And the books of qira'ah you study today in any institution, you'll learn his book of Shatibiyah, Qira'at al-Shatibiyah. So according to Imam Shatibi's turuq and his way and where he narrated from, according to Maddul Muttasil, you'll make tawassul. But there is another riwayah and another turuq of Duri which comes that you can recite Maddul Munfasil for Hafs, just Qasar, 1 alif. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ. Now if you hear qira'ah and if you hear the recitations, for example, of Shaykh Shurayn, Hafidahullah, the famous Imam of Haram, you'll notice that when he leads Tarawih Salah, most of the time in Maddul Munfasil, he's reading for Hafs, but he makes Qasar. So how is that possible? Because he's not reading for Imam Shatibi, he's using a different turuq. Now these turuqs, for example, Imam Shatibi learned from his ustad, and his ustad, his ustad. Imam Shatibi was the most prominent scholar of his time. So when he wrote the book, and he was blind also, rahimahullah, and when he wrote his book, it was the most vastly accepted and acknowledged book. And obviously every single person, whether it be Imam Shatibi, like the brother mentioned, Imam Jazari is also, before you study Shatibiyah, you'll study Jazriyah. All of these scholars, their turuqs and their sanad will go back to one of the prominent sahabi I mentioned, Zayd bin Thabit, Abu Musa al-Ashari. So each one of them has their own turuq, but only thing is that according to the acceptance of their book and the people saying that these are the most knowledgeable. Imam Shatibi, at his time there were many other people knowledgeable in the field of qira'ah, but because of his knowledge, because of his book he wrote, he became the shining star. Just like I mentioned, the different fuqaha. Imam Adam was first, but Imam Ahmad, Imam Maqim, Shafi, these imams came. There were many other imams who were prominent, but their madhabs died out slowly. But for whatever reason, so same with Imam Shatibi, and that question you asked regarding turuqs, there are different turuqs. What we read predominantly and what we learned growing up is the turuq of Imam Shatibi.
What are the others?
There's the most famous is Durri. Riwayat al-Durri, yeah. Now when you do Qira'at al-Ashara, you do a kitab called Matn al-Durra. Now that is also another turuq. Now the turuq is that, I don't know the exact chain as far as who comes what, but they have their own chain, and like I said, it ends up in those 5 Sahaba.
Like Susi, what is
yeah, Susi also, you can have the qira'ah, he's under the same turuq of Imam Shatibi. Susi, Warsh, Hamza, Kisai, Abu Amr, all the imams, all 20, they all fall under the, basically, the Shatibiyah turuq. Jazakallah khair. No.
Can you go from one recitation to the next in the same at the same time while you're reciting? Or
Yes, yes. Your brother asked a question, can you transition from one recitation to another recitation? So let's say, for example, when I'm reading myself, for teaching purposes, you can read one ayah in one particular qira'ah, the next ayah in a different qira'ah, the third ayah in a different qira'ah, no problem. When you're reading salah, the scholars have said that for each rak'ah, you'll choose one imam and stay with him. So if you're reading the first rak'ah of Salatul Isha, for example, and the imam is leading, he reads 10 ayahs. The first 5 ayahs he reads for Hafs, and then in the second 5 ayahs in the same rak'ah, he reads for Warsh. That's not permissible. In salah, in one rak'ah, you have to stay with one imam. But when you're reading generally, you can go from ayah to ayah and read any of the qira'ah, whether it be Bazzi, Ibn Kasir, whichever of the imams you prefer.
Very good. Very good.
Any more questions? Yes.
So if I'm reading Salah and I read Alam yakun nutfatan min maniyyi tumna, and the people
That's
want
a
to
qira'ah, that's Warsh. So if you're reading, for example, your question was, brother asked, Alam yakun nutfatan min maniyyin tumna, instead of yumna.
Yeah.
Yumna is what we read. Tumna Imam Warsh reads. You understand? So his question is, can I read it in Salah? Yes, but if you read that ayah for Warsh, then you have to complete the whole rak'ah in Warsh. Not that you mix up. That is makruh and not liked by the ulama.
Okay.
But if you want to read the whole rak'ah and riwayat to Warsh, no problem. Yes, brother.
Could you clarify a little bit? I couldn't quite follow the fact that you're saying there are 10 recitations and then there are 20. I don't
Basically,
follow that.
there's 10 imams, 10 leaders, for example. So you can say that they are basically the teachers. Now each one of them had 2 students. So 10 times 2 is 20. So technically speaking, you have each, and so the general rule is this. Each imam had 2 students. Now the imam is a leader, he taught his students all the rules of his qira'ah. So the students follow him in every single law that he taught them. But there are certain laws that the students form themselves. You understand? So that's permissible for them. So they still do everything their teacher says and taught them, but they still have some of their own different laws that they formed. Like I gave you the first example. Imam was Nafi'. Nafi' was an imam. He had 2 students, Qalun and Warsh. Now Qalun and Imam Warsh both follow Nafi' in all the rules and ahkamat of his qira'ah. But at the same time, Qalun and Warsh had some difference of opinions in certain rules, and they formed their own qira'ahs, which were also mutawatir and which were accepted. So you have 10 imams, 10 accepted qira'ahs with 2 students. Now, the question that you asked, this part I did not clarify. Jazakallah khair for asking. There are 7 of those reciters. The hadith mentions 7. So 7 reciters, their qira'ah, basically 7 reciters plus 2 students like I mentioned, that is mutawatir. It meets the conditions, criteria of being mutawatir, stronger. There's 3 more which are not mutawatir, but they are mashhur. They are called mashhur, meaning they are one level below mutawatir. They are authentic also, they are read, but they are just not at the level of the 7. But they are also acceptable. And they are the Imam Yaqub, you understand? And there's the interesting thing is Imam Hamza had 2 students, Khalaf and Khallad. So Khalaf is his student in the 7 ways. But he formed his own way, and he's one of the imams of the 10 qira'ahs, and the 3 extra, 3 plus. So I hope that clarifies.
So basically, is it right to say that there are 20?
That's correct. You can say that, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's correct.
So would there be any such thing as Qalun and Asim? Rawai, Qalun and Asim?
No, because Qalun and Warsh are students of Nafi'. So you will say Nafi' about Qalun. So yeah, he has nothing to do with Asim. So anything he does is either his own laws or the laws following his teacher.
So
So
what do you mean by the own laws?
laws meaning certain rules and certain ahkamat that they read. For example, I'll give you the same example. The imam is Nafi' and he has 2 students. So he has his students, Imam Warsh and Imam Qalun. Imam Warsh, for example, reads Wadduha. Instead of reading Wadduha like how we read, he makes taqleel of that Dhawatul Ya Ra, he reads Wadduha. So that is a law which is pertaining to his qira'ah. And now you might say, where did this law come from? No, it was read from the time of the Prophet. It was one of the accepted ways. Now, from wherever Imam Warsh was situated, one of those the areas I mentioned, whether it be Basra, Kufa, Makkah, Medina, that qira'ah became popular there. Not wad-duha, but wad-duha. So that, the way he taught, and he became famous, and he was the most accepted authority at that time. But his teacher, and his teacher never taught him that particular rule, or that particular ahkam, even though he follows Nafi' and other rulings. Do you understand? Do you understand the point? That even though the ustad is there and his two students follow him, there are certain rules that they have in their own qira'ah. And like I said, every rule that these 10 times 2 of their students do, every single rule they do is mutawatir, meaning it's been proven from the time of Prophet ﷺ. So in that time, there was people who were reading wad-duha, wad-duha, wad-duha. All three were being read from that time, night time, that time.
So is there like 7 mutawatir or
7 mutawatir, and then plus 3. We say sab'a ashara qira'ah. 7 are mutawatir, the plus 3 are mashhur. Like I said, mashhur is one level below mutawatir. Still strong, still acceptable for you to read and accepted throughout the world and taught. But they are not on that level, and they don't exactly meet the full criteria of those 3 things I mentioned.
But there are only 20 mutawatir, but 10 times 2 is like
Mutawatir would just be 7 times 2. And then you have those 3 times their 2. Those are mashhur. So that's a good question. 7 times 2 is mutawatir. Those are the ones which are proven strong. And then you have the remaining 3 qurra, which you do after the ashara qaris. They are mashhur. They're one level below mutawatir. Strong but not as strong.
So the total would be 17 then. 14 plus
14 plus 6.
No, 20.
20. 14 plus 6.
14 plus 6.
2.3 is
Zagreb, that's a very good question. Any other questions?
I have a question. Excuse my ignorance, but what we're talking about is the teaching of how to read the Quran.
Correct.
But it's not how it was written.
Yes. Okay, is that so? Your question is basically: are we the topic is pertaining to reading, but what does it have to do with writing?
Yeah, my understanding the writing's never changed.
Yes, that's correct. So the brother asked a very good question. Jazakallah khair. That basically the topic we discussed today was concerning just reading and recitation. Now, rasm it means writing. Now you have to understand there's certain words which are written in the Quran. And if you write that same word, that word is written. If you read that word, if you wrote that word, if it wasn't in the Quran, just in the Arabic language, you wrote that word, it could be possibly written differently. But in the Quran, you might have an extra alif or something, because we say that the Quran, even is written, the kalam is Allah, is directly from Allah subhanahu wa taala. So the writing of the Quran also has not changed. Now you might ask, oh, if that's the case, then in one place you're reading ya'lamun with a ya, and another qira'ah reads ta'lamun. But you understand, these, like I mentioned, those of the 7 things which are acceptable as far as changing, one was you can change the verb connotations and the placements and the basically changing of the dots has no effect as far as the writing. So from the mushaf of the Prophet ﷺ, you have to understand that there was no dots in the Quran. The word ya'lamun, for example, it didn't have, when you read the letter ta has 2 dots on top. But when they used to read the Quran in the Prophet's time, they didn't need it. They were Arabs. They spoke the language. They were fluent. So there was no dot, no connotation to say whether it was a ta or yeah. So for someone like me and you who are non-Arabs, it would be very difficult to read. But for them, they knew ta'lamun or ya'lamun. But so the first thing is both are correct. And secondly is, during the time of the Prophet, until Hazrat Uthman's time, there were many different mushafs and scriptures. So all of those scriptures were from the Prophet and all directly revealed and all written in the different qira'ahs. So one mushaf might have ta'lamun, but another Quran might have written ya'lamun. Both were divine revelations. I hope does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Does it clarify it? So there's no difference as far as you can. No one can claim that the Quran was, that due to different ways of reciting it, does that mean that the writing has changed over time? No, the writing has been the same. It was as it was since the time it was revealed in the same divine fashion. Jazakallah khair for that question, brother. Any other?
Is there any evidence that what Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam his time recited the most ways of the Quran? Like you mentioned, out of the 7, what are these hadiths?
Well, there's a hadith mentioned in Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, that Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned that the Quran came down in one mode, then I waited, then it came down in another mode, and then it came down again. So Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam made tilawah and recited in all the different modes. And even in the one riwayah where he heard Abu Musa Ashari reciting, he said, "Verily you have been blessed with the voice and the soul of Dawood alayhi salatu wasalam." He was known to recite in the various modes. So all those different modes of recitation, from that riwayah, you know, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that him and Jibreel alayhi salam, they recited the Quran in all the different ways.
There was one Sahabi about him, Nabi Karim said that your way of reading, reciting Quran resembles most the way of Jibreel alayhi salam.
Okay.
It's a bit off the topic, but
Yeah, I would have to double check actually. Jazakallah khair for that question. The brother asked, there's a Sahabi that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that your way of recitation coincides with the way of the recitation of Jibreel alayhi salam. So I would have to double check that. I'm not sure about that. Jazakallah khair.
Out of the 20, which is the most prominent, or what are we are hearing here?
The most prominent obviously is the riwayah of Hafs, what we hear every day, what we learn growing up, what you hear in Makkah, Medina, whole dunya. That's the most prominent. The Qurans that we have present here, that is the most prominent. So Hafs was actually not, like I mentioned, Hafs was a student. Asim was a teacher. Shu'bah and Hafs were his 2 students. But Hafs, he gained popularity because his style became the most frequented from his time, his knowledge, everyone succumbed to his knowledge. So now his style is the most prominent, not even amongst the 20, but throughout the world now, the most prominent way of reading, or the most common way of reading, is the riwayah of Hafs, which we hear most throughout the world. You can say 80-90% of us, that's what we read. Unless those mutahaqqi, or those people who are specialized in the field, they'll learn the different ways. The 3 main ways of Quran, I don't want to say main, but you don't want to generalize, but there's basically maybe 3 or 4. Hafs, riwayah of Warsh, Hamza, and Qalun. These 4 recitations are generally, the certain parts of the world are just taught. You'll go a certain part of the world, they don't learn, like how we learn Hafs, they just learn Warsh. That's the way they learn Quran growing up, from Qaida and the initial stages. So these 4 are the most prominent types of qira'ahs in the world right now. The other are still remaining, but not as prominent, unless you've studied and you know. But these 4 are spread throughout the world.
where is Shoba found, for example?
Shu'bah is because Shu'bah was a student of, he's part of the same chain, so of Asim, Shu'bah, and Hafs. So you can't really say that his qira'ah is not predominantly read anywhere in the world, because his qira'ah is probably the most similar to Hafs. Maybe some places here and there, in the 24th juz on the last page, there's a word a'jamiyu for those who memorize. So according to Hafs there, you make tasheed. According to Shu'bah, you might not make. So they just have very few differences. It's almost the same thing. So you can't say that, oh, this place in the world, Shu'bah is read. There's no place like that. Yes, sir.
One clarification, you first mentioned that written wise there has not been variation or difference or divergence over there.
Yeah.
And yet when answering the question that, what's the most common one, you said just like the Qurans that we have over here.
Mm-hmm.
When you talk about the Qurans that we have over here, you're talking about the written thing in there basically. So
Yeah.
you're saying that for the other recitations, the way the Quran is written is also changing basically over there? Or did I not interpret correctly?
Yeah.
Basically?
Well, what I meant by the Qurans here, meaning the rules and regulations of the qira'ah of Hafs that you learn. You understand? So, for example, when we're learning Quran, we learn we have to do gunna, certain place, ikhfa. For Imam Warsh, he doesn't have those rules, for example. So when I said these Qurans here, those rules that we learn pertaining to our qira'ah, growing up learning the rules of Hafs. So those rules are in these Qurans. Now the qira'ah, the mushaf of Warsh, for example, if you have a mushaf only of Warsh, it's the same exact thing. It's the same exact thing. Only the places where the laws are different, there might be a marking there. So instead of Hafs in a certain place, he might not, Imam Warsh, we say this Quran, for example, it's ta'lamun. He reads over there, ya'lamun.
Yeah, written over there.
Yeah, it's there. It's just a matter of the dots, but.
Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Just to clarify, there's no correlation between geography and Qur'an recitation, like in specific parts of the world, like in East Asia or South Asia.
There is. Certain parts of the world, like I mentioned, If you go to North Africa, Morocco, these places, Warsh is predominant. That's what they learn. They'll learn that. That's the Quran. Like how we learn the riwayah of Hafs growing up, they learn Warsh. Now if you go to certain places, Southeast Asia, they same, but there's certain places where they do riwayah of Hamza specifically, and Basri too. Susi also. Susi is a very famous qira'ah too in certain parts of the world, where he reads, one of the main rules of Susi is instead of saying laqad sadaqa Allah, he'll say, for example, laqad sadaqa Allah. So geographically, like I mentioned, when certain Sahaba spread out and their students spread out, and then there became a time where certain places of the world became the hubs of Quranic learning. Medina, Kufa, Basra, Makkah, etc., etc. So in those places, I established qira'ah was known, that one imam was famous there. So whatever that imam taught, everyone in that area read that certain way.
All these ayahs that you mentioned were from the same time?
Oh, they are various times.
And how far close they were with the Prophet?
Oh, they're much far down, because the first scholar to codify the qira'ahs, the 7 categories, was in the 9th century. So much later on after. So before the 9th century, there's many qira'ahs which are acceptable. But then it just so happened that they slowly died down, and these 7 were the most mutawatir reported, and they were still strong. And the people who were teaching them, meaning the 7 imams of qira'ah, they were the most famous, the most well-learned scholarly in their field, so they were accepted as the people who are the most knowledgeable in that field. So around the 8th and 9th century, it was actually codified. And it just so happened, the ulama, some say, but we don't believe this opinion that, 7 ahrufs, so 7 imams, but that really doesn't really have any correlation. We already mentioned that those 7 qira'ahs were from the time of the Prophet, and we mentioned the hadith of Umar radiallahu anhu to prove that.
Yes. One more, you keep on using the term turuq. Can you clarify what that is?
Turuq just means chain of narration. So it came from this sahabi who taught someone, who taught someone, who taught someone, who taught someone. Just like in the field of hadith, when you learn,
what level of
so turuq basically is just chain of narration. Basically, so these scholars, the 7 Aimma of Qira'ah, for example, they all had teachers, and all their teachers, that chain goes back to a sahabi, and thus those 6 or 7 sahabi I mentioned who were the main reciters, learned from Prophet ﷺ.
How long is your chain?
My chain, number-wise, I don't know, but I have my son, and so I learned from someone, and then his teacher, and the chain goes right back to Prophet ﷺ. I don't know exactly how many people between myself and Prophet ﷺ. Jazakallah khair.
So we'll just wrap up there. Isha Salah will be, I think we might delay it a few minutes. Imam will allow us. But a few announcements we wanted to make. First of all, Jazakumullah khairan everybody for attending this event. Inshallah, it was very beneficial. I learned a lot myself as well. And one thing, we mentioned, the Qari was mentioning Imam Shatibi. So Imam Shatibi, if you study Qira'ah, you have to study his book basically. He was a man who was predominantly he was known for his book of Qira'ah. Imam Shatibi was blind. He was blind. Yet, to study the science of Qira'ah, you have to read his book. The ulama mention how there's many different ulama, even some Sahaba, that gained such prominence because of their love of the Quran and their love of recitation, reciting the Quran and whatnot. And Imam Shatibi rahimahullah himself, what got his book acceptance was his love of the Quran itself and his ibadah, right? So reciting the Quran is also ibadah. When he wrote his book, he made tawaf 12,000 times. 12,000 times with his book in his hand, making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at each place of making dua and tawaf, that, oh Allah, accept this book for the khidmah of deen. Now 12,000 tawafs, that means what? 7 circuits for each tawaf, so 12,000 times 7. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us of those who love the Quran, and make us from the Ahlullah and the Ahlul Quran. A few announcements we just wanted to make. Number one, this program is put on by Mihrab Foundation. There's many programs that we have weekly throughout the greater Seattle area. Just to list them off, in Bellevue Masjid, taught by Sheikh Qasim, is a book called On Knowing Yourself and Knowing Allah by Imam Ghazali rahimahullah after Maghrib Salah every Sunday. So inshallah you can take benefit. There's another program every Wednesday from 7 to 8 p.m. called Being Muslim. And this is taught by Fawzi Husseini. There's another book Sheikh Qasim teaches here every Thursday after Maghrib on selections of the successful from Riyadh al-Salihin. So this is a book of hadith. There's also a Sira class happening in Mount Lake Terrace, Umar Farooq Masjid. And then there's also a class at the University of Washington on the 99 names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's also a youth halaqah that happens here for boys ages 14 and up. This is Saturdays from Dhuhr, which is currently 1:30 until 3:30 p.m. So inshallah, everybody's requested to come, take benefit in the different ways you can, send your kids, attach ourselves to the ulama, to learning, to the masajid and whatnot. Secondly, also, in order to put these programs on, it does cost some money, so there are donation boxes in the back from Mihrab Foundation. You can inshallah contribute whatever you're able to help support these types of programs for the future as well. Thirdly, also, there's a registration sheet that was passed around. If everybody could make sure that you put your name and your email address on there. It's not for spamming or anything, it's just for future programs. So that if there's future programs, inshallah, that take place by Mihrab Foundation, then you will be able to, you'll get word of them, you'll know about them, you'll get the email regarding those programs. And lastly, after Salatul Isha, inshallah, there'll be some light refreshments, some tea and snacks and whatnot, so everybody's requested to please to take part from it. Jazakumullah khair.
Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulil kareem, Allahumma anta salam wa salam tabarak wa ta'ala wa sami'na wa ta'ala wa ta'ala rabbana alayhi nasir. Rabbana innana sami'na munadiyan yunadi lil imani an aminu bi rabbikum fa amanna. Rabbana faghfir lana dhunubana wa kaffir 'anna sayyi'atina wa tawaffana ma'al abrar. Rabbana wa atina ma wa'adtana ala rusulika wa la tukhzina yawm al-qiyamah innaka la tukhlifu al-mi'ad. اللهم إنا نسألك العفو والعافية والمعافاة الدائمة في الدين والدنيا والآخرة. اللهم أنت ربي لا إله إلا أنت خلقتني وأنا عبدك وأنا على عهدك ووعدك ما استطعت. أعوذ بك من شر ما صنعت، أبوء لك بنعمتك علي وأبوء بذنبي فاغفر لي فإنه لا يغفر الذنوب إلا أنت. رب اجعلني مقيم الصلاة ومن ذريتي ربنا تقبل دعاء. ربنا اغفر لي ولوالدي وللمؤمنين يوم يقوم الحساب. Oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, please accept this gathering of Quran and recitation. Oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, increase the love of Quran in our hearts. Oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, give us the tawfiq to learn the Quran in its proper way, in its proper recitation. Oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, rectify all of our intentions, Ya Allah. Rectify our intentions so that we do everything for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and no one else. Give us the full reward for that rectification, Ya Allah. Ya Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, give us the tawfiq to frequent this masjid and all the masajid, Ya Allah. Give us the tawfiq to take part in these types of events which will help us increase our iman and our knowledge, Ya Allah. Ya Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you are the most beneficial, the most merciful. Have mercy on us, Ya Allah. Those of us who took out time to come out here after our busy days, Ya Allah, reward them, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, look at the sacrifice, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, we are not worthy of anything or bringing anything to you, but through your bounty and mercy, Ya Allah, accept from us this small offering, Ya Allah. You are the most beneficial, the most merciful, Ya Allah. There are children here who are very young, Ya Allah. Look at their eyes and look at their hands, and Ya Allah, accept our dua. Make us from those who repent and make us from those who abstain from sin. Make us from those who love the Quran and who are people of Quran, Ya Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursalin walhamdulillah.